Thank you. I've been enjoying the book so far, Professor.
Well,
But
thank you.
um, I genuinely enjoyed the preface. I think like the preface uh, is a very good and accurate description of India, like and what we actually expect uh, of the Indian state as well. Um, the rest of the book is basically like I think I felt like it was like arguments you arm yourself with. But I have two questions for you.
Hmm.
One is um, often in the West, I think like it doesn't feel like people in the West are like receptive to your perspectives, right? Like, I mean, you've written a wonderful book, but I doubt like the people who would be receptive to your arguments that you're making, as factual as it is, right? And we see that in the manner in which like India is treated by mainstream Western press, right? And even how uh, like laughably bad think tanks are when it comes to their objective analysis of India. Like, so how do you? I mean, there are two things. Like, is it even worth? Uh, uh, I mean, a lot of Indians can arguably say that we shouldn't bother with these things. Like, um, is it even worth uh, trying, or like is it like we should always arm ourselves with the argument in place?
Look, there are two groups who can do something about that. The first is the Indian government and its diplomatic and consular staff. Um, they've so far, as far as I can tell, shown very little interest in correcting narratives about Indian democracy, and that goes right up to the top to Dr. Subramanian Jaishankar, who, although he repeatedly says, you have no right to question our internal politics, and we are a democracy, he never gives the facts. He never goes and says, no, I have data on this, right? He always takes it, he always frames it as you have no right to question us instead of answering the question. And I think that's a massive missed opportunity. I'd like to see, and I've told Indian ambassadors this, I've told Mr. Jaishankar this, Dr. Jaishankar this himself, that each embassy should have a list of, academics who they could refer, um, journalists to if journalists come with questions about India. Instead of giving a bland EAM answer, they could say, "Oh, go talk to these people. They're experts on India, and they can help you understand India better." Uh, that sort of process, and the data in the book are just a compendium that they could use to hand out, to give this information out if they wanted to do so. They've shown no inclination to do so, at least not so far. And the second big group, and probably much more important, is the Silicon Valley CEOs. That there are so many Indian CEOs, chief technology officers, very influential business people, especially in the United States. And they could say to politicians, to others, look, you're getting India all wrong. Here's Professor Babones' book. He's even-handed. He's American. He's not being paid by anybody. Could you have a look at his book and talk to him if you want? And I'd be thrilled to talk to people. But that kind of pressure has to come from people who are much more influential than I am. I mean, I'm just an academic. I can put the research out there. I probably do a lot more than most academics to make things public and to reach out to the public. But ultimately, it has to be people who have an emotional attachment to India, whether that's Indian foreign service officers or Indians abroad, Indian business people, people who really care about India. It's up to them to make the running in this. I mean, if I can just be very blatant about this, I run a small think tank here in Sydney called the Indian Century Roundtable. For the last almost 3 years, we've been trying to get funding, and we've received some very generous support from individuals. We've had, I think, more than 300 individual donors, and we've had some individuals even put up $10,000 each to help us with seed memberships, seed funding as members. Not a single Indian company has funded us, not a single Indian billionaire, right? It doesn't take very much. I mean, if an Indian billionaire wanted to found an influential think tank that promoted a positive vision of India, an accurate vision of India in the West, that's $10 million. Now, that may sound like a lot of money to you or me, but many of these billionaires have funded professorships at Stanford, professorships at Harvard, professorships at University of Pennsylvania, and each of these endowed professorships, if you want to be the Ambani professor at Stanford, or if you want to have a Tata professorship at Harvard, yeah, that's $20 million, right, to endow a professorship. Well, instead of endowing a professorship and having someone who is very India critical get that professorship, put the money into a think tank. That'll go on for the next 20 years, promoting an accurate view of India. And no one has wanted to. I've had many people tell me that they're going to, or they have a friend who's going to, but honestly, nobody very wealthy has wanted to support a better vision of India. And that is both very rich people and also applies to the government. I mean, the Indian government sponsors the Australia-India Institute, but they spend their time promoting nice things like women's entrepreneurship, sports cooperation. They don't touch anything political. So, it's up to governments and wealthy individuals whether they want this narrative to get out. And if Indian governments and wealthy individuals don't care, well, who are you waiting for? Who else is going to care?
Thank you, Professor. I have another question. I understand where you're coming from when you say that the Hindu community needs to extend a hand to Muslims and basically what you might summarize as bring them along for the ride.
Yeah.
Right. But I think there's another side to it that is not being understood very well. And one is that even today, we still, as Hindus, we still face coercive conversions, right? We still experience a lot of iconoclasm, right? I mean, it's the 21st century, right? You should be able to respect other people's traditions.
Yeah.
But despite that, we still experience a lot of iconoclasm. And it's not just within India as well. In the West, especially in Leicester, you had a person by the name of Muhammad Najib, and the UK coach just recently implicated him for basically like raising communal tensions and essentially going after Hindus. So, I mean, what do you do in that case? Like, I mean, it's not like we haven't tried to bring them along for the ride. Like, and it's not like in every step of the way, there's been like a lot of animosity.
Yeah, and not just problems for Muslims, also problems from Christians. There's been strong Christian opposition to the building of Hindu temples in both Australia and the United States. When Christians using all the tools of local government, zoning restrictions, that sort of thing, to try to prevent the construction of Hindu temples. There is a lot of anti-Hinduism in the world. In fact, I wrote a paper about anti-Hinduism and a couple of articles about anti-Hinduism. That said, India has to find an answer. And it's not enough to say, look, I'm not talking morally here. I'm talking as a sociologist, advising you on India's own nationhood. I don't care what Muslims do in Leicester or what Muslims do in Western Sydney. The question is, can Muslim Indians be brought fully within the national mainstream? And if the answer is no, and look, maybe the answer is no, then India is going to suffer for the next 100, 200 years, however many hundreds of years, with this problem of a poorly integrated Muslim minority until, as some amateur demographers worry, maybe in 500 or 1,000 years, due to differential birth rates, fertility rates, India actually has a Muslim majority, right? That could happen in 500 years. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes. Well, is that the route forward? Something has to be done. Now, there has to be receptiveness on the Muslim side, obviously, and that's been a serious problem of that lack of receptiveness. I often use the example because I do have this personal connection to Varanasi of the Vishwanath temple. The right answer to the Vishwanath temple controversy is not that the government forces a solution or that there's a political solution. The right answer to the Vishwanath temple controversy is that Hindu civil society groups offer to purchase the site from Muslim civil society, from the Muslim religious community, and that the Muslim religious community should accept that offer. Right now, they're not willing to accept any offer. And that's also a problem, right? The fact that a Muslim religious group is, out of sheer spite, holding onto a site that has no particular meaning for them. It's not a major mosque. It's not the Al-Aqsa Mosque or something unsolvable like that. It's just a decrepit local mosque in Varanasi. Sell it to the Hindu side, and you would become, and this is something that Muslims have to learn in India, they would become national heroes, not for giving away their mosque, just for selling their mosque. They would become national heroes celebrated around the whole country. Why don't they? I don't know. But Hindu Indians have to give them that opportunity. And I think it would play very well if Hindu Indians offered $50 million for the site of the Vishwanath temple. And then if the Muslim side turned it down, to say, look, we're trying, we really want to make this, to do this, we really want to be friends together, and to try to shame the other side into accepting an offer. And I think that approach of, being generous and trying to use moral suasion to build a lasting solution to these problems. Well, I'd like to at least see it tried. I shouldn't say I'd like to see it as a human being, as a humanitarian. It's my recommendation that it be tried as a sociologist, because that's a much better solution than having the courts or the government force a solution, in which case there will just be lasting resentments for another 5 generations.
I was beginning. Just to add to this, Rishabh Agarwal, one of our members, has mentioned that Hindu groups had tried multiple sites actually purchase the land, but unfortunately it was not accepted. So, okay, we have one more our members, Aryan Invader. Please your questions within the topic and within the civility. Go ahead.
Har Har Mahadev, Babones ji. Nice to see you here. What I wanted to ask is, in India, this majority-minority issue, most of the just a second. Most of the people, the way they see the issue of majority-minority is from the Western perspective, like the things were there between the majority and the minority in the West, that is white versus black. My point is, the history of India is not the same as the West.
Yeah.
Because West and the white people, no offense to you, but they were colonizers, while Hindus in their own country were never colonizers.
Yeah.
They were attacked from outside. The demography could not be shifted completely towards Hindus becoming a minority. That's why they were told that you are a majority, therefore you are oppressors. I think this perspective needs to change, because in Africa, it is very clear that black people are not oppressors, though they are in majority. It is clear that the white people or the other people who came there were oppressors. So here, when we say that Hindus should reach out to Muslims, the point is, are Hindus really the oppressors? that they should reach out to the Muslims or the oppressor side who destroyed our temples, who forcibly converted our people. They need to make amends, because when they, even today, when situations like Murshidabad happens, that they throw Hindus out of that district, or the Kashmiri exodus happens in 1990, then what is the Hindu side supposed to do? That is
Thank you.
what I'm thinking.
Thank you. Please, sir.
So look, I want to be very clear. In the book, I try to address exactly that that falsehood, the idea that Hindus are oppressors in India. And I'm very explicit in the book that there's nothing like the white oppression of African Americans or the oppression of indigenous peoples, that in fact, historically, it's Hindus who have been oppressed by Muslims in what's now India. And I'm very explicit about that in the book, and I want to correct the Western understanding of these problems. At the same time, I put it to majority Hindu Indians, it's your country, which is to say India has a fundamentally Hindu nation that underlies its democracy. Hindu Indians are not just the majority, but also are those who dominate in peak institutions today in India. And whatever misbehavior there may be by members of other groups, the fact is it's your country, and it's your country either to have a healthy society or to foster a society that has endless recriminations. Believe me, if you read the book, you will not find that the Muslim side is exonerated or excused of the historical crimes that were committed by Muslim Indians. Quite the contrary, I highlight those crimes. That said, I think we are where we are today, and we have to. Indians have to come to some reconciliation, some solution to this problem, or have to accept that they're going to live with this problem for 100 years, for 200 years. I mean, when is it going to end? It certainly can't be healthy for Indian society to have 15% of the population that maybe feels that they are second-class Indians.
Yeah, do you have any more questions? Please go ahead.
I just want to add that if Muslims are like Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam or KK Muhammad, we have no problem with a Muslim going to a mosque or doing anything.
Yeah.
Because these are the kind of Muslims who accepted the fact that while being a Muslim, we are living in a Hindu country, a civilization which is Hindu, and they respected that fact. So I think that is where the impasse is, where do we accept the nature of this land, which is very Hindu. So yeah, your point is right that we also need to reach out. And I think our state also has a role to play, where they have marginalized Muslims by giving them separate personal laws,
Yes.
allowing them to not become a part of the mainstream, allowing them to keep their women backward. So that has also separated them and created a parallel society. So
And
I agree with you.
And everything you're saying, I highlight in the book. That the book, remember, is meant to educate a Western audience. And what I'm telling the Western audience is that they're, contrary to popular perceptions in the West, there's no repression of Muslims in India. That the Muslim personal laws are illiberal, patriarchal, and completely at odds with modern democratic norms. That the violence in India the intercommunal violence has largely been stoked by from the Muslim side, not from the Hindu side. So I'm making this very clear to Western readers in the book. But I also challenge Indian readers to ask what they want for their country for the future, and solving the problem. Well, it's something that will require some kind of outreach, some kind of effort. Now, there are many Muslims today who are starting to say what we want is to live peacefully in society together. And I know those small number of Muslim intellectuals are widely lauded on the Indian internet. They're very popular on Twitter, and that's a good thing. That's a great reform. But it has to go further. And if I can just give one example, that as an outsider, that I would encourage both sides. I mean, in a country that's a liberal democracy like India's, if you want to have a religious procession down a main street, you can register for a permit, and it's your right to have the procession. And of course, if you want to have a Hindu procession right in front of a major mosque, it's legal. You can do it. But you know that it's going to cause distress among people. And, why not have the procession on a different street instead of pushing it in front of the major mosque? On the other hand, if you're Muslim in India and you like doing the call to prayers and you want to do the call to prayers every hour and you want to start at 6 a.m, do you really need to hook up a massive loudspeaker? Yeah, okay, you may have the legal right to hook up a loudspeaker, but wouldn't it be more neighborly to have a quiet call to prayer? I mean, after all, when the call to prayer was done before the 20th century, there were no loudspeakers. It's not like loudspeakers are an inherent part of Muslim religious practice. So you could also be good neighbors. And that kind of good neighborliness, that may sound very down home, very basic, but I think it would go a long way towards reducing the potential intercommunal flashpoints for violence in India. And then if both sides are showing that they respect the other, and here I have a whole chapter dedicated to Swami Vivekananda, whose plea, he doesn't say that Hindus are right or Muslims. I mean, he says that Hindus are right, and that Muslims are wrong. He admires Muslims in many ways, but he thinks ultimately the Muslim path to God is only a subset of the broader Vedanta path to God. Okay, fair enough. But he emphasizes that it's important not just to tolerate your neighbor, but to sympathize with your neighbor, to try to understand your neighbor's needs, desires, and approaches to life. And that's why the chapter is actually called Not Only Toleration, because toleration isn't enough in Swami Vivekananda's philosophy. Sympathy is required as well. And that sympathy is lacking on both sides in India. It's not a Hindu problem of lack of sympathy for Muslims. It's a Muslim problem of lack of sympathy for Hindus. Both sides are going to have to either resolve that or be at odds, like I said, for the next 1,000 years.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Babones sir. And let's take last few questions from the audience. Thank you, Aryan, for joining. We really appreciate your support. Thank you. Sir, we have a question from an anonymous Hindu, another member, asked, do you think this anti-Hindu mentality around the world is increasing because of the recent found love of Hindus, that is Hindus, a hyper-nationalism, extreme public display of religious rituals?
No, that is, I think anti-Hinduism has been a force in the West, in Britain, especially in the British West, ever since colonial era. I think today's anti-Hinduism is a hangover from British colonialism. During British colonialism, there was a strong sympathy between British colonizers and local Muslims, both because the British Empire included a very large Muslim empire in the Middle East, but also because British viewed Muslims as fellow Abrahamites and fellow fellow worshippers of one God, monotheists, whereas they viewed Hindus as a lower form of religion. Now, not every British person felt this way, but broadly speaking, that was the of British administration. And I think that follows on in British academia today, even among people who are not themselves Christian. They still view Hindus in a negative, and not my word, I'm just using this to characterize their sense, in a filthy light. There seems to be a visceral anti-Hinduism among many Western and especially British intellectuals. That anti-Hinduism, of course, aligns with Islamist anti-Hinduism. Islamists have much more direct causes for anti-Hinduism. And so this ends up with what I've called an unholy alliance between Western academic intellectuals, Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Middle East Eye and Al Jazeera, and then the third part of that is Western human rights organizations. who all conspire in this anti-Hindu effort. Now, I constantly tell Congress Party supporters who have been critical of my work, just wait until you win the election. If you ever win an election, you're going to find it's you now who are the filthy Hindu, not Narendra Modi and the BJP. And I say that because this anti-Hinduism had already labeled India as among the worst countries in the world for freedom of religion back in 2010, right? This isn't something that started in 2014. Now, of course, it has become more apparent as with a more muscular Hinduism of Narendra Modi. It's also become more apparent as India and Hindus in general have become more prominent on the world stage. But the underlying emotion, just like anti-Semitism, the underlying emotion, I think, has been there all along.
We have one more question. Yeah, is some quantum politics. So he has a comment and a question both. There is little space for Hindu dharma and its practices, temples in urban spaces in modern times. So how can you philosophically frame urban practical Hinduism that will connect across urban and rural and tribal divide?
That's actually the next book. So I've started a major research project on something I never thought I would study, a major research project on Hinduness. And that's because Westerners still turn to Max Weber's 1920 book on Hinduism as their primary source for understanding the sociology of Hinduism. Now, I'm not a religious scholar. I'm not a theologian. I'm never going to write a book about Hindu theology. That I don't have the language skills. I don't have the interest. I don't have the expertise. None of that. But understanding how Hindu faith has evolved with the transition to modernity, with urbanization, of course, and with diaspora, has resulted in really interesting changes in what it means to be Hindu. Since traditional Hindu faith would have been centered around a very geographically specific and caste-specific and family-specific form of worship, that has now dissolved in many ways into more modern Hindu sects and more modern Hindu traditions that have we've seen the development of a systematic Hindu theology that probably would be unfamiliar to people 100 years ago or unfamiliar to people in many rural parts of India today. So it's all subject for a book. And the biggest thing I want to take on in that book are the myths around caste. Because it's clear to me as an empirical sociologist that although caste, and by here I mean jati, is something that has been present in India for as long as we have records of, good records of it, at least since the Middle Ages and probably earlier, the connection of jati with Hinduism, and I use the word advisedly as an organized Hindu faith, that is in many ways a British creation in India that then Indians learned from the British. And so many Indians learned that their own faith was casteist because that's what the British told them. There's very little evidence, empirical evidence, for a connection between Hindu faith and jati. Now, Hindu faith in Varna, certainly, but historically it's been very unclear which jati belonged to which Varna. And in fact, if you go back to the Vedas, there's no such thing as a caste having a Varna. Individuals have a Varna. And any individual could have any Varna depending on that individual's role in society. So it's something that's really fascinating. The connection, the blatantly incorrect teaching in the West that Hinduism is a caste-based religion it's completely wrong. It needs it needs some kind of correction in the West, and it needs a correction within India, because many Indians who've been Western educated or educated in Western curricula in India have accepted that narrative, which simply is historically and empirically false. So next major research project, look for a book in 2030.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Babones, for your time. And like for the audience itself, what Professor is telling about that the caste system is something which is solidified, done as a documentation into who is which jati and which caste. So there is a book called Shivashakulam. It is written by a South Indian individual. It's a very good book. So Professor Babones, I will also like, if I can, recommend a book if you can read. So you can read this book on caste system, ancient caste system and Jati Varna system, how it operated. This is the book called Shivashakulam. You may know about it, but for the audience also, I'm just sharing it.
Look, there are several very good Indian books that clarify the situation. There is Caster Castaway by Sachi Sharma, I believe it is. There is Varna Jati Caste, which I think is by Rajiv Malhotra. There are several good books. What they're lacking is a research basis. So these very good Indian books explain the reality that they know, but they don't have the empirical survey-based and census-based foundations to demonstrate that those facts are correct. And what I want to do is go to the empirical basis. Again, write a sociology of the Hindu faith. And hopefully, if the 2027 census data are made public, I'll be able to use that data in it as well.
Thank you, Professor Babones, for coming to the show. Thank you for asking a bit difficult, maybe bit controversial questions. So we really appreciate your time, and maybe we can invite you one more time to discuss, because I had a lot of questions which you could not ask because of time and because of audience. So maybe sometime we can invite you again to discuss more about the book when the Indian edition launches. So that could be time.
Looking forward to it. And again, if you're outside India, please do pick up the international edition. The publishers will be thrilled. The more I sell, the more likely it is they'll publish my next book. If you're in India, wait till December. There'll be an Indian edition at Indian prices. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And the book link will be available in the live stream as well as in the comment section. So do check out for that. You will get all the details. Thank you, Babones sir. Namaskar.
Namaskar.